New York, and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning. Laura Stiles. Rosenberg's out for Yom Kippur, but give it up for Carmen Perez back on the program. Who do we have with us today?
We have Jessica Perez with us.
How you doing, Jessica? Nice to meet you.
Good morning.
We just had a Jessica in the room. Jesse Reyes was just here. So it's good to meet you. They don't call you Jesse, they call you Jessica?
Yes, Jessica.
Or Jess? No nicknames?
Yes, Jess.
Jess. You guys not related? Perez and Perez?
We related. We movement fans.
Movement fans. Now, if I remember what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, we say chance.
Are we talking bail reform today?
We are talking about bail reform today.
Now, there's a lot of stuff I want to get into that we've talked about in the past on the show. But I think every time we have a conversation with you, I like to re-bring those things up because I don't think people go and do research on the conversations that we've been having for the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, you've been coming up here for a while. But first, let's talk about bail reform. What's going on? What are we doing tonight? There's an event.
There's an event tonight. It's a salon with a group of about 30 people that are coming together to really talk about how we could better the legislation that was passed this past year here in New York, and also what's happening across the country. I mean, bail reform, I don't think, I know in the community that I grew up in, people got bailed out. That was like, hey, get your money together, let's bail folks out. Recently we had somebody we had to bail somebody out, and unfortunately, they got remanded back into prison, actually. But, I don't think we actually really understand what bail reform is or what bail is, right? Like, we don't really understand what it's used for. Like, at the end of the day,
where the money actually goes and
it's
why
not
there
even
is
about
money.
where the money actually goes. It's about, like, why do we have bail, right? Like, we all have the right to be innocent until proven guilty. Nowadays, you are guilty until you could provide some money to get out of jail so that then you could work on your case from the outside, right? Because at the end of the day, we're supposed to use bail as a release during pre-trial, right? So unless you're a flight risk, but now everybody gets bail set, and oftentimes people can't afford the bail that is set for their case, right? We know one of the common cases that has been heard over and over and over, and I know Jay-Z and folks made a documentary about it, was the Khalif Browder case, right? He spent 3 years at Rikers where he was abused physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually, right? Because he allegedly stole a backpack. And his family could not afford jail. And then oftentimes some of our family members say, hey, like, while he did it, like, might as well stay there. But we don't realize the impact that it has on people. And
being incarcerated, being locked down, having to deal with other types of criminals that are dealing with or have different mental health disorders, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and not just that impact that it has on somebody physically, but the impact that it has on the family as a whole, right? So, you get locked up for something, you're waiting to go to court to go to trial, and you're waiting. You have a job, you've been doing things. You have kids. You got a family you're supposed to support. So, like, what happens to you, right? You become somebody that is no longer being able to contribute to society. And so when I think about what happens, oftentimes there are so many consequences that happen because people are being sent to jail and they can't afford bail. And so one of the other cases that we got involved in or with a couple years ago was with the Pedro Hernandez case. And that's why we have Jessica here, because Jessica is Pedro Hernandez's mother. Pedro Hernandez was a young man who spent about a year at Rikers with a $250,000 bail. It was set at $200,000. The judge raised it to $250,000. So they had to put up about $500,000 in assets.
And also, if I recall, your son was on his way to college, right?
Yes, he had won a scholarship.
Yeah, won a scholarship.
While in Rikers.
Yeah. And did he end up still getting that scholarship, or no, he lost it?
He ended up losing it because it was like a timely matter. And it's first come, first serve, you could say. It's the Posse scholarship, so he didn't fulfill
that was the cop, remember, over in the Bronx that ended up getting investigated. Remember? Because he was terrorizing the community. And he was trying to holler at different women in the community. And then when they wouldn't give him the time of day, he was harassing their kids,
And
locking
taking their
people
kids
up,
in.
You know what I mean? And that was a whole thing. And I think he then, remember, tried to spin it and make it like, oh, the NYPD's being racist against me.
Right.
Right? And I think that case is still going on, right?
Yes, it is. And
But he's not on the force.
not that I know of, but apparently certain cases against him got dropped. Pedro Hernandez case against him is not dropped. And I'm going to assure you it's not going to get dropped because I have sufficient evidence to prove that everything he did, he wasn't supposed to do. And he was
what was
acting.
his name?
David Terrell.
I remember.
We talked about him on the air a lot.
Definitely did.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you look at who's sitting at Rikers right now, 2 out of 3 people at Rikers are waiting for trial. Right. And so this is just, again, a proven case of the consequences because Pedro Hernandez consequences, because he was locked up, he wasn't able to go to college. And so there's just so much that happens. And so there has been legislation that has been passed. And so Jessica could also talk about, the advocacy that has happened with that, but also the loopholes, right? Like there's so many loopholes even in the fact that like we could pass as much bail reform, but there are still people who are black and brown and poor who get caught up in the system.
Like one of the loopholes in this bail reform is that for violent felonies is a different type. They don't qualify to get dismissed and things like that. They also leaving it to the judge discrepancy. In Pedro's case, for example, the judge raised the bail. And the judge put a surety of $500,000 when it was in a drug case, it was in a robbery case. They only use those type of a surety when it's like a big case. He was just 16. He was a minor. So the judge felt like he wanted to raise it up. He did it.
And so if the cop, and in this case, a corrupt cop, says that the crime is XYZ, the kid is like, I wasn't involved in that, but because that cop, in this case, a corrupt cop, said that the crime was something violent or whatever, you're going to be beholden to that, even though...
Well, not even. The cops tells the DA, and if the cops is working directly with the DA, like in my son's case, he was directly working with that DA, not only on my son's case, but on many other youth around my community that I end up investigating and coming forward with evidence. The DA was taken away from the Bronx office.
Well, yeah, wasn't the Bronx DA the ones they was having parties in the office up there and they was smoking weed and stealing weed and doing all that and having
even
sex
worse.
on the job?
Yes, sex. Not only weed, drugs, and all that.
So you had the cops and the district attorney's office up there getting it in, smoking weed,
they're
and
living
then
their best
harassing the
life.
community.
And they bumped the charges, so they allowed to do that. So if this bail reforms, we're leaving it to their discrepancy. A misdemeanor could turn into a violent felony just because they want it to be violent. So I probably got into a fist fight with you, your phone dropped, for example. Now I could turn it into a robbery. Forced robbery, I stole your phone and all that when the phone really dropped in the fist fight we just had. So now it becomes a robbery in first degree and all this. So it's up to their discrepancy. So that's why when we look into bail reforms, we got to pay attention to those little writings. And the fight is not over. We got to keep fighting to get the right ones.
So now on the state level, there's been a bail reform passing of some sort of bill.
Yeah, there's legislation that was passed.
And what does that mean? What does it actually mean?
So let me share some of what that means. So it reduces the number of arrests, pre-trial release. So almost all misdemeanors and nonviolent offenses will be released without bail. It's easier to pay bail. So in some cases where bail is still allowed, the new law requires that the judge issue 3 forms of bail. One in which you can have an unsecured bond. So you could sign an agreement and you could pay partial bail. The new law also prohibits the courts from contracting with any private for-profit entity. So right now, if you look at the bail industry, I believe it makes about over $2 billion a year. And so these companies make all this money off of black, brown, and poor bodies. And so what this does is that it doesn't allow for the courts to actually contract with these types of companies.
And in New York State.
Yeah. And look, I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna be real. I remember posting on Facebook, hey, if we were trying to pass bail reform in California, would you all vote for it, right? And a lot of people are like, no, we don't want you to take our bail away. Like, I want to be able to bail somebody out. But there's this misperception. We don't need bail for certain incidents, right? Or allegations. Again, the system is supposed to work in the way in which you are innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent, and how much you could pay to get yourself out. Exactly.
So people just fear that there's going to be no way to be able to get their loved ones out of jail. So that's why they're super scared.
They think no bail means no getting out.
Right. Exactly.
No bail means no, you shouldn't have to bail someone out. You shouldn't have to pay a fee to get people that have been locked up until their crime. You shouldn't have to pay to get them out.
And if you look at who's bailing people out, it's women. Right? Women bail out their husbands, their partners, their son, their kids. It's women fighting these cases. I mean, Jessica is a prime example of that. And it creates this cycle of poverty because it really affects the family. And so what we want to happen is we want people to be informed about why there's bail, right? And to also continue to push for more comprehensive legislation, and to make sure that companies aren't swallowing Black, brown, and poor people up by making profits off of their bodies. And I think, with Pedro's case, Kalief Browder's case was on a whole different level. It was like, wait, what? It wasn't really until he got out that we learned what was happening to him, right? Like the fact that he was in there for 3 years. I think the bail was Cass, about $5,000.
But to a mom who has 3 kids working 2 jobs,
it was
hard.
That's it, right? Like, we don't want people to have to go to court and have to put up bail and then not afford it and then go into a facility for 3 years and be abused, right? And then when we learned about Pedro Hernandez's case, it was actually Sean King who was like, yo, Carmen, you need to connect with this woman, Jessica. She's been fighting for her son, along with her other family members and her son, Louis. And so we're like, bet. We got on a call on a Friday. On a Monday, we had a family coalition meeting of 50 organizations that we're like, let's wrap our arms around her and her family. And so we started working, but she was working for a whole year on her own. And it's mothers like that take on this heavy lift. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want mothers to be alone. We don't want family members to suffer. And we also want to make sure that people are informed why bail was initially set up. And it's not working in the way it was initially set up. So let's get rid of it.
The event is tonight, and the event is just a way for us to have a deeper dive into continuing to improve, not at the state level, but make the changes also on a national level.
Yeah. But I think it's important that people get educated on what it is. Again, in my community, you just living. It's kind of like bail is part of your life. Somebody going away on vacation is part of your life. It becomes a norm, and we don't ask questions. We just kind of get caught up in a cycle. And it's not our fault. It's the fact that we're just trying to live. And so, as many people who could come out in support of bail reform or just connect with organizations, we're at NY Justice League. Our website is also www.gatheringforjustice.org. If people want to support this work, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and go to our website because we're always welcoming people and their voices. And we also want to hear about the other Pedro Hernandez's, right, and the other Jessica Perez's.
So, Jessica, dealing with this and everything you're doing for bail reform, how's Pedro?
He's good. He had to take a semester off from college. He's suffering from PTSD lately. Cops are still harassing him. But thanks to Carmen and to all this work that we're doing around bail reform, he recently got stopped by the cops. They tried to arrest him. He said, I'm allowed to get a disappearing ticket. I have a clean background. The officer says, no, you have an extensive arrest charges, because that's what it is, arrest charges. Everything is dismissed.
Right.
The officer goes and says, oh, yeah, because of this new law, we got to give you a disappearance ticket for loud exhaustion of his car. So
because
for
of
things like that,
the muffler.
Yeah, because of the muffler, they want to process him through the system, give him a bail. They did it before. I had to go again and give a $750 bail for loud exhaustion and things like that. That it shouldn't have to happen. But because he was Pedro and he got this extensive arrest record, they don't look at the dismissals of his case. They just looking at, well, he got arrested, so he's got to get arrested.
He must be a problem.
He's got to get processed. That's how the officers are seeing it. NYPD 12 is an example of that. You know, they came forward and even they
That's
they
the
alerted
quotas
me,
and all that.
Yes, they alerted me of how the process is working and what to do when things like this happen. So now I have to live two lives. I have to live my normal life, work with my other kids, and I also have to be Pedro's lawyer on the call. You could say on the call. So whenever he gets stopped, I have to be in FaceTime. I got to speak to the officer. You're not allowed to search his vehicle. He got rights. I'm his mother, this, that. So keep officers away from harassing him. Going to the precinct and things like that. That's why I want the community to understand that we got rights. Anybody gets stopped in the Bronx.
What part? South Bronx?
We usually from South Bronx. We are not staying there no longer. I'm not allowed to say where we live in now because of safety issues.
Well, no, the reason I brought it up, though, is because also this happens in these neighborhoods that they trying to gentrify because they trying to scare people out to move out.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, so they keep harassing the moms and the kids and the dads and all that shit. And this happens in a lot of cities around America where they harass people, put them through this shit over years. And then eventually people are just like, we got to move. Like, I can't live like this.
That's why we got to educate our communities. Mm-hmm. You got the radio. Everybody listens to you. Let's educate. Let's let them know they got rights. Let them know this bail reform is working in most of the ways.
It's exhausting, though. That's
you
the
understand?
piece, though. Like,
I know.
God bless you. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of people ain't got the energy like you.
We got to listen. My energy's wearing off, but we got to do it.
No, I get it, but you know how many people cave and just, you know what I mean? They just can't do it.
But to your point, you said that there's a lot of cases have been dropped, right? Not sufficient evidence, and they will work tirelessly to try to tire you.
Oh, yeah.
So you can give up.
So I could get that. That was Pedro's case. Pedro wasn't in there because I couldn't afford bail. Pedro was in there because they wanted him in there. Because they offer him a plea deal, come out and take 5 years of probation. Let us monitor you for 5 years for something you didn't do. Let me tag you as a criminal for something you didn't do. And because Pedro said, you're not tagging me, I'm not a criminal. I won my day in court, and I'm going to show you I'm innocent. That's why the judge managed to put a surety and everything on the case and to keep him behind bars. And that happens in a lot of cases.
And not just are they trying to tire out the family, but there are video surveillance where Pedro was being beaten by some of the people that were supposed to be monitoring him. It's crazy. And the fact that folks get away with this is also crazy.
Right, but look, we looking at this Dallas PD situation, right? You saw the Dallas police officer, Amber Guyger, walks to the wrong apartment, shoots a man while he's watching TV and eating ice cream, right? Boom. She gets 10 years. The mother, who doesn't live in Dallas, is at the podium after calling out corruption. She said, quote, I have never seen corruption like this. Everybody be careful and pay attention. Yeah. Because this isn't just the levels of police corruption. Now, the guy who was the main witness in the case, murdered. Mm-hmm. And you know what they pinned it on? 3 dudes who drove 4 hours to sell some weed in Dallas. In what world are people driving 4 hours to get weed from Dallas from New Orleans?
Kill somebody.
Nobody.
So they pinned it on some dudes, and anybody knows it. Yo, the lady gets convicted on a Thursday, and by Sunday, the main witness is murdered in front of his crib? At close range?
Nah.
Yeah, that was a personal.
And so anybody that's dealt with what you're dealing with knows how crazy shit gets.
But let's turn it around. You think if she would have been a man, if she would have been black, she would have got 10 years?
Oh, no, she would have got more.
The judge would have been hugging her?
No, absolutely not.
So that's where we see that the justice system is not fair. But we can't give up. If we give up, that's
absolutely
it.
Right.
We got to keep fighting.
Absolutely right.
And no stop.
Speaking of keeping fighting, Carmen, a few months ago, Jay-Z decides, along with his team, that it would be a good idea to figure out a way to partner with the NFL. And I don't like it, but I understood it. And the reason I say that is because there is part of this fight that is financial, right? Because what I believe Hove is trying to accomplish, part of it, is to figure out a way to leverage real big dollars back into the Reform Alliance, organizations like yours, the Gathering for Justice, and other organizations that are on the front lines doing local work. Because these organizations have to go out and ask people to donate.
That's right.
And it is it's an ideal scenario when you can make a corporation, right? These major corporations, especially the ones, which are most of them, that benefit from young black men being phenomenal athletes and performers and entertainers, right? To leverage that money. When there was a split, right? So there was people who understood it and didn't like it. There was people who hated it straight out, didn't want to be a part of it, and were angry at Jay-Z. And there were people who completely got it. So it was a lot of fragmentation over the conversation. Can you impart on us, because I know you not only have worked with Rock Nation in helping the Meek Mill situation, but have worked with the Women's March and have worked with, or currently the Gathering for Justice, Harry Belafonte. So you've seen so many different sides of how this plays out over a long period of time. What do you say about this partnership?
So, geez, thanks for putting me on the spot. I
Well,
mean, these are the type of conversations I like to have in private because I like the debate, right? And I don't know if we could really have a debate on the radio because there's going to be so much opinion about it. But I feel like one thing that I am always willing to do, and Mr. Belafonte taught me to do, is that you meet people where they're at and you champion them to your cause, right? Okay. And part of it is having those courageous conversations. But I know for us, we don't compromise the community that we advocate for, right? It's not about, if we're working with people who are formerly incarcerated, right now we're working on looking at our retirement. And if our retirement invest in gun products, right? Or
meaning
any
like
type
your
of
retirement plan of your company.
Yeah.
Right.
So
okay.
we recently, as an organization, are now going to get retirement. Thank God, right? And so one of the things that we were talking about during our staff call was like, wait a second, does our retirement actually contribute to the things that we're fighting against? And it actually does. Right. And so we have to look
like
at
a 401k mutual fund, whatever, and the corporations that
the corporations that we looked into. So as long as you're not, and so now we have to have a conversation because that's not part of our value system, right? And so it's really about looking at your values. What are your values? Leading with your moral compass. But I think that the conversation needs to happen. I worked, and I always say this, I came from having a brother who's formerly incarcerated, having a sister who was killed and buried on my birthday, to then working, creating alternatives to incarceration. And at some point, as I'm knocking on the door of probation to release these young people, is I said to myself, I need to learn the system so that I could advocate from the inside out. And so sometimes we play the inside-outside game. We have to learn their language. We have to learn the way in which they navigate in order for us to bring resources back into our communities. And so what I think that Jay-Z made was a strategic move, right? Some people will say it's a money move, but, I'm still waiting to see what comes out of it. And I know he's having conversations with a lot of organizations that are on the front lines. But I think that there's also the part of where people have this loyalty to Colin Kaepernick, right? Where people are like, we kneeled, we're boycotting
That's right.
The NFL. And so why even get in bed with the NFL? Is because as you are, boycotting an industry or a company, you also need to have the people that are doing the negotiations. And so at some point, I hope that these two individuals could have a conversation and have a real honest conversation about what does it look like to not compromise any type of community.
Well, I also hope that we love Jay-Z, but the rollout of this whole program was terrible. And it was because there was no kind of inclusion of the individual Colin Kaepernick that even got it to this point, right? For whatever reason, and I don't know the behind the scenes. I also, there was things that I felt like Jay-Z said during that conversation that was just arrogant and not sensitive. Right, which I think, and I know for a fact he's smarter than that, but I think in the heat of the moment of just having dialogue.
And I think sometimes we're put on the spot to name something or to say something, and we haven't necessarily formulated all our thoughts, but people are wanting to hear from us. And so I don't want to dismiss what he said by saying, oh, like, you know, because I certainly haven't been paying attention to that, but I do know that, again, there should be a conversation between these two folks. And because them coming together unites a whole community, right? Like it unites a movement. They have so much influence in every, and some people say, nah, I don't follow any of them. You know, there are those folks, and that's fine. But I'm talking about those of us that are taking a knee, those of us that are also listening to Jay, you know, like we're like, it's the same thing. It's the same community. And so, you know, there are things that have been said, but I also know things get taken out of, you know, Mr. Belafonte had once been asked a question about Jay-Z and Beyonce and how they contributed to the community. And somebody just took it out and made it something big and created beef between Mr. Belafonte and Jay-Z that was actually nothing. So again, you know, I don't really pay attention to the news. I think, you know, the way in which people show. I've met with Rock Nation. I've met with some of their folks, and they're doing the best that they can. They're seeking organizations that are willing to be part of the conversation to move things forward in a very intentional way. And so
I guess, you know, because you've been doing this work and you're on the front lines and you've talked to so many people in a different world, the reason I wanted to know is because I want people to understand that it's not as easy as we don't fuck with the NFL, right? Like, black men are still playing it. Sports.
And my brother posted the other day, he's like, there's only one nation, and that's Raider Nation. I was like, and his sister's over here boycotting, right? Like, it's just crazy.
My family just saying it's a part of...
It's part of our families. Like, you know...
So I guess I want people to be more knowledgeable about how complicated these things are and that there are multiple paths to the same destination.
Yeah.
And we're not going to agree. And by the way, I encourage us not always to agree because that's how we get to the best resolutions sometimes, right? Like the fact that there are people on multiple sides. We're holding Jay-Z accountable on this show all the time. I hear something that's foul or he gave to an organization that, yo, this looks crazy, bro. I don't like this, whatever. But I do understand that he's trying to do the work his way, right, and get to it. And by the way, it is a money move. It is about money, and it's about leveraging money because the NFL makes a lot of it. Are black and brown bodies.
Exactly.
Also, it hopefully takes the prison reform conversation into areas outside of the New Yorks and LAs where we have these more progressive conversations, and Philly, right, into middle America, hopefully, where they're having these conversations in Dallas. They're having these conversations in New Orleans. They're having these conversations in Kansas City, in Green Bay, outside Milwaukee, you know what I mean, in middle America, because we live in New York and we think everybody's having these conversations. That's not what's happening out here.
It's not.
And the NFL is in places where these conversations are not happening. And they're not paying attention because they don't have to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, I appreciate your time today.
We appreciate y'all too.
Tonight, are we giving out the location? Can people come? Is this
No,
private?
It's a private conversation. Okay. There's going to be more conversations that happen where they'll be opened up to the public. But I think we're also, again, I think part of it is us getting our stuff together, right? Having conversations, who's doing what, how are we doing it, what role are we playing, and also really understanding the legislation, right? Like, Jessica was talking about the fact that Pedro knew that officers need to give him a desk appearance ticket versus taking him to jail. That's the new law. That's part of the new law. And so I want to say to your listeners, right, next time you get pulled over for some loud music or a muffler that's gone out, you don't have to go to jail. You could get a desk appearance ticket. So, we're still trying to, dissect the legislation, also identify the loopholes. A lot of the loopholes have implications of racism, right, in them. So we're going to have that conversation, see what we could do, and also who could donate, right? You hit it on the head. A lot of us are doing this work, and we need resources. And so it's also going to be a conversation around, how do we fund this work?
Give it up, Carmen Perez. Jessica Perez also, thank you. It's good to see you again.
Thank you.
For having us.
Thank you.